It was almost midnight when my car sputtered and died, rolling to a reluctant stop on the shoulder of a road that seemed to stretch endlessly into nothingness. The sky above was a heavy blanket of stars, indifferent to the fact that I was stranded, with no headlights passing by and no signs of life in either direction. My fingers trembled as I clutched the phone, typing into the family group chat. "I need help. My car broke down on the road. Can anyone help me?" The message felt like a flare shot into a void, a desperate attempt to believe that someone, anyone, might care enough to respond. Seconds ticked into minutes, each vibration of silence making the air colder, heavier, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to realize the truth I had always tried to deny. The first reply came, not with concern, but with the sharp cruelty I had grown to expect. My mother, Elaine, typed back with clinical detachment. "You're always getting yourself into trouble. Deal with it alone." I stared at the words, letting them sear into me, as though the glowing letters on the screen had been branded onto my chest. A lifetime of her indifference rushed through me, every instance where my cries for help had been silenced under the weight of her disdain. My heart thudded painfully, not just from the fear of being stranded, but from the reminder that I was, in her eyes, nothing more than a burden. The car was quiet, too quiet, except for the occasional creak as the cooling metal adjusted to the night's chill. Then came the second message, this time from my brother, Matthew. No words of comfort, no offer of help, only a laughing emoji, followed by, "Ask the friends you think you have." The words cut deeper than the isolation itself, like salt rubbed into an old wound. I had once believed that siblings, no matter how strained, would at least stand up for each other in moments of desperation. But Matthew had always chosen mockery over compassion, sneers over solidarity. His message didn't just tell me to fend for myself, it mocked the very idea that I had anyone worth turning to. I stared at the screen, waiting, hoping for another message from someone else, maybe a distant cousin, maybe anyone. But the group fell silent, and so did the night. I sank back into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel though it could offer no comfort. The air inside the car was stifling, filled with the smell of old upholstery and my own anxiety. My throat tightened as the reality pressed down on me. I was alone, on a deserted road, with no family to call on, and no one even pretending to care. The silence outside was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of insects in the grass beyond the asphalt. I tried to breathe slowly, to keep my panic from spiraling into something I couldn't control, but each exhale felt ragged, too loud, as though it might draw unwanted attention from the shadows beyond the glass. Memories of other nights like this one clawed their way back into my mind. Birthdays forgotten, tears ignored, emergencies minimized. This was not the first time I had been left to face the dark alone. It was merely the most literal. My mother's voice echoed in my head, always cold, always certain. "You make your own messes. Don't expect me to clean them up." I felt smaller with every memory, like a child curled up in a corner begging for warmth that would never come. Only now, at 28, the corner was my broken-down car, and the coldness was both metaphorical and real, seeping in through the thin cracks around the doors. I considered calling roadside assistance, but I knew the wait could take hours, and my battery was already draining fast. I typed out a message to an old friend, deleted it, retyped it again, then let the cursor blink on an empty screen. The shame of needing someone, of reaching out only to risk rejection, weighed heavier than the silence itself. My family had already confirmed what I had always feared, that no one would come for me. I clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, the glow of the screen making my reflection in the dark window look ghostly, like I was fading before my own eyes. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that didn't belong to the night's usual symphony. At first, I thought it was just the rustling of leaves or the distant cry of an animal, but then it grew sharper, rawer, unmistakably human. Screams, faint at first, like echoes carried from far away but growing louder, urgent, threaded with a desperation that clawed at the marrow of my bones. My breath caught, every nerve in my body stiffening as if the sound itself had reached through the darkness and seized me by the throat. The stillness of the road shattered under the weight of those screams. My first instinct was denial. I told myself it must be a trick of my imagination, the way fear can twist ordinary sounds into horrors. But then another scream came, piercing, followed by a choked cry that ended abruptly, swallowed by silence. I froze, pulse racing so fast I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. My car no longer felt like a shield, but a fragile cage, trapping me between the safety of staying inside and the terror of what might be happening out there. The night, once indifferent, had suddenly come alive with menace, and I could no longer pretend it was only me against the silence. My phone slipped in my hands as I debated calling the police, but the absurdity of the thought struck me like a cruel joke. Would they even arrive in time? Would anyone even believe me? The woman stranded in the middle of nowhere, with a family that had already written her off as dramatic and helpless? I pressed the phone to my chest, as though holding it close might shield me from the growing dread, but the screams had carved themselves into my mind. The night was no longer empty. It was watching, breathing, waiting, and I was caught in its grasp, trembling between the fear of abandonment and the terror of what had just found me. The silence that followed was worse than the screams themselves. It stretched on like an open wound, leaving me straining to hear anything that would tell me what was out there. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure standing behind the car, but the road was empty, swallowed by darkness. Yet the air felt charged, as though something had shifted in the shadows, and my skin prickled with the certainty that I was no longer truly alone. My family had abandoned me to this night, but now the night itself was answering with something far more terrifying than indifference. The silence after the screams gnawed at me, but it wasn't new. Silence had always been my family's language. Growing up, I learned quickly that love was rationed, that affection was currency to be earned through perfection, and that any flaw meant exile. My mother, Elaine, prized appearances above all else, and I was the imperfect piece that never fit her carefully curated puzzle. She called me clumsy, dramatic, ungrateful, words that bruised deeper than slaps because they were repeated until I believed them. My father, Paul, was present but not present, always hidden behind newspapers or the safe shield of silence. And Matthew, my brother, was the echo of my mother's cruelty, mocking me whenever I stumbled, laughing whenever I cried. I didn't just grow up without love. I grew up with disdain carefully disguised as discipline. I remember sitting at the dinner table, the silverware clinking in perfect rhythm, and feeling the invisible wall that separated me from them. They spoke about their days, about Matthew's grades, about neighborhood gossip, but never about me. When they did, it was only to criticize. Grace, sit straighter. Grace, don't chew so loudly. Grace, can't you do anything right? I ate quietly, swallowing not just food but humiliation, learning to make myself smaller so that maybe they would forget I existed. But invisibility never protected me. It only made their sharp words land harder, as though my silence made me a target. By the end of each meal, I would excuse myself with a fake smile, retreating to my room to cry into the pillow that absorbed secrets no one wanted to hear. Birthdays were the cruelest reminders that I didn't belong. I remember my 12th birthday vividly. No balloons, no cake, just my mother handing me a book she had clearly bought last minute, with the price tag still stuck to the back. Matthew laughed, saying it looked like something from the clearance bin. That night, I sat by the window and whispered to myself that maybe they had forgotten because they were planning something bigger, something special, but nothing ever came. I spent that day, and so many others, waiting for surprises that never arrived, for hugs that never came, for love that never bloomed. Each year I blew out candles alone, making wishes that dissolved into smoke before they ever reached the sky. The worst part wasn't the neglect itself, but the pretense of normalcy they presented to the outside world. To neighbors, we were the perfect family. The Evanses who smiled at church, who waved politely, who brought casseroles to community events. My mother would grip my arm so tightly it left bruises, whispering through her fake smile, "Behave, don't embarrass me." And so I did, playing the role of the grateful daughter in front of everyone, only to return home to the suffocating emptiness that was my reality. It wasn't just hypocrisy, it was theater, and I was the reluctant extra in their play about perfection. No one saw the cracks because my mother never allowed them to show, except when it came to me, the family's carefully concealed flaw. There were nights when I would press my ear to the wall, listening to my parents and Matthew laugh together in the living room. I longed to be part of it, to walk in and have them pat the couch and invite me to sit, but I knew better. I knew that if I walked in, the laughter would stop, and my mother's eyes would narrow, and the air would grow heavy with disapproval. So I stayed hidden, learning to smile at my own solitude, inventing imaginary friends who filled the space where family should have been. I told myself it didn't hurt, that I didn't need them, but deep inside, I ached with a hunger that no food could fill, a hunger for belonging. When I was 15, the rejection became official. After a particularly heated argument over something as trivial as a B on a math test, my mother shouted that I was no longer her daughter. Her words weren't metaphorical. She meant them. "You'll never be part of this family if you can't carry our name with pride," she snapped, her face contorted with disdain. My father stood in the corner, eyes lowered, saying nothing. Matthew smirked, almost gleeful, as though my exile was his victory. That was the night I realized I wasn't just neglected. I was unwanted. They didn't see me as broken. They saw me as disposable. And so I stopped trying to win them over, because there was nothing left to win. The rejection shaped me in ways I am still untangling. I learned to survive on scraps of kindness from strangers, to build armor out of silence, to hold myself together with threads of determination. But it also left scars, an instinct to expect betrayal, a reflex to flinch when someone raised their voice, a habit of apologizing even when I hadn't done anything wrong. My family had denied me not just their love, but also the foundation every child needs to grow. I built my own foundation, shaky at first, but stronger with time, while theirs crumbled behind their perfect facade. Yet even as I grew stronger, the ache for their approval never fully disappeared. It lurked like a phantom, whispering that maybe, just maybe, one day they would change. And now, sitting in this broken car on a deserted road, their messages on the family group chat replayed in my mind like ghosts of the past. Elaine's cold dismissal, Matthew's cruel laughter. It was all the same script, recycled, reaffirming that nothing had changed. 14 years later, I was still the disposable one, still the burden, still the mistake they wanted to erase. The darkness outside pressed closer, but it was nothing compared to the darkness they had planted inside me. I thought I had escaped it, built a life beyond their reach, but tonight it came rushing back with brutal clarity. I had no family. Not really. I only had myself, and the silence I had been forced to befriend. And then, as if to underline that cruel truth, the screams returned, closer this time, sharper, cutting through both the night and my thoughts. My phone slipped from my grasp and clattered against the floor, but I barely noticed. My chest tightened, a mix of dread and strange recognition, as though the cries in the distance were not from strangers, but from the child I used to be, crying out for help that never came. The family that never was had abandoned me again, but the night had other plans. It was no longer just my past haunting me. It was something real, immediate, and terrifying, demanding that I face it whether I was ready or not. The screams grew louder, sharper, cutting through the stillness of the night until they seemed to echo inside my own chest. My breath caught as I leaned forward, peering through the windshield into the shadows that stretched along the deserted road. My headlights were long dead, leaving only the dim glow of my phone screen, which now felt like a useless talisman against the darkness. For a moment, I debated locking the doors and pretending I had heard nothing, convincing myself it was just an animal or a trick of the night. But deep down, I knew those cries belonged to a human voice, desperate and broken, and if I ignored them, I would become like my family, turning away from suffering, dismissing it as inconvenience. That thought made my skin crawl more than the fear itself. I stepped out of the car, my shoes crunching against the gravel, the cold air wrapping around me like a warning. The night smelled of damp earth and gasoline, a strange mix that made me uneasy. My phone's flashlight cast a narrow beam that barely sliced through the blackness, and I followed it like a lifeline. Every step forward sent my heart racing faster, as if my body wanted to turn and run, but my mind refused. The screams were less frequent now, replaced by muffled sobs that seemed to come from just beyond the bend of the road. I swallowed hard, telling myself not to be reckless, but there was no turning back. I couldn't live with myself if I ignored someone who might be dying while I sat in my car pretending not to hear. As I rounded the bend, the sobs grew clearer, and then I saw it, a figure crouched on the roadside, illuminated by the faint moonlight. It was a man, his clothes torn, his hands shaking as he tried to cradle something, or someone, on the ground. My heart slammed in my chest, and for a second I froze, unsure if I had stumbled into something dangerous. But then I noticed the streaks of blood on his shirt, the raw terror in his eyes. When he looked up and saw me, "Help," he croaked, his voice hoarse, as though he had screamed himself dry. "Please, she's hurt." He gestured to the figure lying beside him, a young woman, pale as porcelain, her hair matted with blood that glistened under my weak light. I rushed forward, my fear momentarily forgotten, and dropped to my knees beside her. Her breaths were shallow, ragged, and her lips trembled as though she were clinging to the last threads of consciousness. I had no medical training, no idea what I was supposed to do, but I couldn't let her die without trying. "What happened?" I asked, my voice shaking, my hands hovering uselessly above her chest. The man swallowed hard, his face a mask of anguish. They ran us off the road," he whispered. "A truck. It came out of nowhere. We swerved. She hit her head when the car flipped." His words tumbled out in gasps, each syllable heavy with desperation. My mind raced. There was no traffic, no lights, no chance of help unless I found a way to call for it myself. I grabbed my phone, fumbling with trembling hands as I tried to dial emergency services. The signal was weak, the bars flickering between 1 and none, taunting me with their instability. I walked a few steps away, raising the phone high, begging silently for the connection to hold. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the call went through, the operator's voice faint but steady on the other end. I gave them our location as best as I could, describing the desolate stretch of road, the bend, the overturned car I hadn't even noticed yet lying in the ditch. They promised to send an ambulance immediately, though their words carried the weight of uncertainty. It could take time, too much time. I ended the call and ran back, kneeling beside them again. The man introduced himself in fragments. His name was Daniel. The woman was his younger sister, Emma. He spoke between frantic attempts to keep her awake, repeating her name, begging her not to close her eyes. His voice cracked in ways that shattered something inside me, because I recognized that tone, that raw ache of someone terrified to lose the only person who mattered. For a moment, envy cut through me like glass. Here was a brother fighting desperately for his sister's life, while mine had laughed at me in a family group chat, mocking my misfortune. The contrast burned me from the inside out, but it also fueled me. If no one had ever fought for me, then maybe I could fight for Emma, if only by keeping her alive until help arrived. Emma's eyes fluttered open briefly, and she whispered something I couldn't catch. Daniel bent low, his ear close to her lips, and nodded quickly. "She says, 'Thank you,'" he murmured, glancing at me with eyes that glistened. My throat tightened, and for the first time in hours, I felt tears sting my own eyes. No one in my family had ever thanked me for anything. I had been the burden, the embarrassment, the one who ruined everything. And yet here was a stranger, on the edge of death, acknowledging me as if I were her lifeline. That small word, "thank you," healed and broke me all at once. It made me realize how starved I had been for simple recognition, for proof that I mattered, even in the smallest way. The night stretched on endlessly, each second a battle against despair. Daniel rocked slightly as he held his sister's hand, his face pressed against her knuckles as though sheer willpower could tether her to the world. I found myself kneeling beside him, one hand on his shoulder, lending him the strength I never had growing up. We were strangers bound by crisis, yet in that moment I felt closer to him than I had ever felt to my own blood. The irony wasn't lost on me. Family wasn't always the people you were born to, but the ones who held on to you when everything else fell apart. I had spent years chasing something my family could never give me, but tonight I was beginning to understand that perhaps it wasn't me who was lacking. It was them. Finally, faint in the distance, the wail of sirens cut through the night, a sound both terrifying and relieving. Daniel looked up, his eyes wild with hope, and I felt my own lungs release a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The ambulance lights broke through the darkness, painting the road in flashes of red and white, as though the universe had decided to intervene at last. The paramedics rushed to us, their voices sharp and efficient, their hands steady as they lifted Emma onto a stretcher. Daniel clung to her hand until the last possible second, his body trembling as if the separation might kill him too. I stood back, watching the chaos, my body numb, my soul oddly awakened. I had come to this night abandoned and unwanted, but now I was part of a story bigger than myself. And yet, as the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens wailed again, a strange unease settled in my stomach. Something about Daniel's story didn't quite add up. His eyes had flickered when he spoke of the truck, his voice too hurried, as if rehearsed. And when the paramedics asked who should ride with Emma, he hesitated, just a second too long, before insisting it be him. I wanted to believe in him, in this fragile bond we had formed, But as the night swallowed their lights, the question pressed harder against my ribs. Had I just stepped into someone else's tragedy, or into a story far darker than I imagined? The silence after the ambulance left felt heavier than the screams that had first drawn me from my car. I stood on that stretch of road, my breath visible in the cold air, staring at the place where Emma had lain moments ago. The night closed in again, swallowing the flashing lights and leaving me alone with questions that buzzed inside my head like angry insects. My car sat a few yards back, useless and abandoned, its dark shell watching like a silent witness. I replayed Daniel's words. They ran us off the road, but the way he said it nagged at me, too quick, too desperate, as if he had rehearsed the line long before I arrived. And his hesitation before entering the ambulance, it lingered in my mind like a splinter. Something was wrong, and I knew it. I forced myself to walk toward the ditch, the place where their car had supposedly flipped. The sight stopped me cold. Glass glittered like scattered stars on the ground, and the twisted wreckage of a small sedan lay on its side, smoke curling faintly from under the hood. It was a brutal scene, violent and raw, but what unsettled me wasn't the wreck. It was the absence of skid marks, no evidence of sudden braking, no desperate attempt to stop. The road was smooth, clean, undisturbed, as though the car had veered off with no resistance at all. My skin prickled as a thought slithered into my mind. What if no truck existed? What if Daniel lied? The idea terrified me more than the darkness ever had. I crouched closer, my phone's light sweeping across the wreckage. The passenger side was crushed inward, consistent with Emma's injuries, but the driver's side, it looked almost untouched. The driver had likely escaped with barely a scratch, maybe only minor bruises. My stomach twisted as I remembered Daniel's torn clothes and shaking hands. He had seemed desperate, but not wounded, not even a scrape I could see in the poor light. Was his disheveled appearance staged? Had he torn his own shirt to appear as though he had fought for survival? My heart thudded violently in my chest as suspicion gnawed at me. The man who clutched his sister as if his soul depended on her survival. Had I mistaken an act for love? I stumbled back toward my car, my thoughts tangled and suffocating. I tried to remind myself that grief can look strange, that trauma makes people act in ways we don't understand. Maybe Daniel's hesitation, his story, his appearance, all of it, was just the fractured behavior of someone in shock. But even as I tried to soothe myself with reason, I felt a chill that no logic could shake. My family had always accused me of being paranoid, of imagining betrayal where none existed. Yet wasn't it paranoia that had kept me alive in their house, where every day was a battlefield of criticism and cruelty? My instincts had always been sharper than I gave them credit for. And tonight, those instincts screamed that I hadn't seen the full truth. I sat inside my dead car, hugging myself, scrolling through my phone as if answers might be hidden in the glowing screen. I Googled the road's name, desperate for landmarks to help me feel grounded. That's when a news article from 2 weeks earlier flashed across my screen. Local man questioned in connection with sister's injury after mysterious crash. My breath caught. The names weren't Daniel and Emma, but the details were hauntingly similar. Siblings, a deserted road, a wreck, and an older brother who claimed a truck forced them off course. The sister had survived then too, though with critical injuries. Police had found no evidence of another vehicle, only the brother's frantic claims. My hands shook as I scrolled, reading line after line, feeling as though the night had folded in on itself, repeating the same tragedy. The more I read, the more the unease grew inside me, expanding like a balloon about to burst. Had Daniel done this before? Was Emma his victim not of fate, but of something darker? My mind recoiled at the thought, but it refused to let go. I imagined him at the hospital now, weaving the same desperate story for nurses and doctors, gaining sympathy, hiding behind his frantic devotion. I imagined Emma, fragile and broken, unable to speak the truth even if she wanted to. And I imagined myself, stupid, gullible, the perfect witness who could testify that, yes, she had heard Daniel's story. Yes, he seemed like a grieving brother. My chest constricted. Had I just become part of his cover? I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, the cold metal grounding me as panic swirled inside. I wanted to believe in Daniel, to believe that the bond I had felt with him wasn't one-sided, wasn't based on lies. For a moment he had made me feel seen, understood, like family. But family, I reminded myself bitterly, was often the place where lies grew thickest. My own family had taught me that. The cruel messages in the group chat replayed in my head. My mother's dismissal, my brother's mockery. They had abandoned me without hesitation. Was it any surprise that another person, even a stranger, might do the same in a different way? Trust, I realized, was both a necessity and a poison. And right now, I didn't know which one I had swallowed. The night grew colder, and I knew I couldn't sit there forever. The ambulance had gone, but soon police would arrive to secure the wreck. I debated whether to wait and tell them my suspicions, or to disappear quietly, slipping back into anonymity. But then my phone buzzed. A single notification that made my blood run cold. It was a message from an unknown number. "Thank you for helping tonight. Don't tell them anything. I'll explain soon. D." My mouth went dry, my fingers trembling as I stared at the words. How did he already have my number? Had he taken it when I called for help? Or had he known who I was from the beginning? The desert road stretched silent around me, but I no longer felt alone. Eyes seemed to watch me from the dark, unseen and patient. I shoved the phone into my pocket, every nerve in my body screaming to leave. Yet beneath the fear, another feeling curled deep in my chest. Curiosity, sharp and unyielding. Who was Daniel really? And why did I feel as though my life had just crossed into something I couldn't turn back from? Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in my bed, the ceiling fan turning lazily above me, but my body remained tense, my mind replaying every detail of the crash and the message Daniel had sent. My phone glowed on the nightstand like an accusation, the words, "Don't tell them anything," etched into my brain. The way he signed with just D made it feel almost intimate, like he thought we were allies now, bound by some secret pact. But what bound us, really? I was nothing but a stranger who stumbled onto his nightmare, and yet a part of me shivered at the thought that maybe Daniel didn't see me as a stranger at all. That thought, more than anything, kept me awake until dawn broke. When the sun finally painted the horizon in muted pinks and grays, I got out of bed and checked my phone again. No new messages. Relief washed over me at first, but it was short-lived, because beneath the silence lay a gnawing certainty he would contact me again. People like Daniel, if my instincts were right, didn't let go easily. They pulled and pulled until the rope snapped or you gave in. I poured coffee, but it tasted like ash, my nerves too frayed to appreciate the bitter warmth. My eyes burned from sleeplessness, but my mind felt sharper than ever, dissecting every memory of that night, looking for signs I might have missed. Had he planned for me to be there? Was I just unlucky or chosen? Later that afternoon, while scrolling numbly through my emails, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message but a call from an unknown number. My throat tightened as I let it ring, every instinct telling me not to answer. But something reckless inside me, the same part that had wandered into the ditch to look at the wreck, pushed me to swipe. "Grace?" The voice was low, steady, too calm for someone whose sister was fighting for her life in a hospital bed. "It's Daniel." Hearing my name from his lips felt invasive, like he had stepped across a boundary I hadn't given him permission to cross. My hand trembled, but I forced myself to say, "How did you get my number?" He chuckled softly, and the sound chilled me. "You gave it to me, remember? When you called for help." I wanted to tell him he was lying. I wanted to scream at him that I had never shared my number, that somehow he had taken it, stolen it, invaded my life without asking. But instead, I stayed quiet, letting the silence hang heavy between us. He spoke again, his words wrapping around me like smoke. "I just wanted to thank you again. Emma's still unconscious, but I know she'll pull through, and I know I can trust you, Grace. Not everyone is trustworthy, but you are. I could see it in your eyes last night. The intimacy of his tone, the way he said my name like he'd known me for years. It was suffocating." I muttered something about needing to go, and before he could reply, I ended the call. My hands were damp with sweat, and my heart pounded like a warning drum in my chest. The rest of the day was a blur of false distractions. I cleaned, I tried to read, I walked aimlessly through my neighborhood, but everywhere I went, the unease followed. Every face seemed suspicious, every shadow a threat. That night, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was shorter, darker. "You're not alone in this anymore." I stared at the words until they blurred, my stomach twisting violently. What did he mean by that? Not alone how? I wanted to block his number, erase the thread, pretend it never happened. But fear stopped me. Blocking him would feel like defiance, like cutting a wire on a bomb without knowing if it would detonate. and a part of me needed to know what he wanted, because ignorance felt even more dangerous than knowledge. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope stretched across a void. Daniel's presence seeped into my life, subtle but relentless. Sometimes it was a text at dawn, cryptic phrases that made little sense but left me shaken. Sometimes it was a missed call at midnight, the silence on the other end when I dared to answer. He never asked for anything directly, never threatened, but his persistence itself was a threat, a slow suffocation. My family group chat remained as cruel as ever. When I tried once to mention the breakdown, my mother replied with a single word, pathetic. My brother followed with a gif of someone crying dramatically. Their indifference only magnified Daniel's voice in my head, because at least he seemed to see me, even if that gaze felt poisoned. One evening, after a particularly long day, I sat on my porch with a blanket around my shoulders, trying to calm the storm inside me. That's when a small envelope slid under my front gate. My heart jolted as I ran to pick it up, my name scrawled across it in sharp handwriting that I instantly recognized. I opened it with trembling fingers, the paper crackling under my touch. Inside was a photograph, grainy, taken at night. My car, broken down on the roadside, and in the corner of the frame, my silhouette standing in the ditch, illuminated by my phone's light. My blood turned to ice. Someone had been watching me that night. Not just Daniel, but someone else. Or maybe Daniel himself, documenting everything. The message was clear. I hadn't just stumbled onto the crash. I had been seen, chosen, marked. Fear coiled inside me, heavy and suffocating, but tangled with it was another dangerous thread, curiosity. Why me? Why that night? Why did it feel like this wasn't chance, but something that had been waiting to happen? Daniel's words echoed, "You're not alone in this anymore." It dawned on me that whatever had begun on that deserted road, it wasn't over. It was only tightening around me, a trap disguised as fate. I knew then that I had two choices: run, hide, pretend I had never seen any of it, or step into the darkness and confront it before it swallowed me whole. And though terror gripped every part of me, I felt the answer already burning in my chest. I had been abandoned all my life, left to fend for myself. This time, I refused to run. As the night deepened, I sat in my darkened living room, the photograph on the coffee table like an open wound. My phone buzzed again, another message from him. "Soon you'll understand everything. Don't be afraid." I closed my eyes, but instead of shutting out the fear, it only intensified, spreading through me like fire. Yet behind it, a grim determination began to form. Whatever Daniel wanted, whatever secret he was weaving, I would not be his passive participant. For the first time, I decided I would dig, I would watch, I would turn the gaze back on him. Because maybe, just maybe, the only way to survive the web tightening around me was to become its hunter instead of its prey. The photograph never left my mind, even when I tucked it into a drawer, even when I tried to forget the sharp lines of my silhouette etched against the night. It hovered over me like a phantom. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing again. Another message. "You looked braver than you felt that night. I admire that." My throat tightened, bile rising with the realization that Daniel had been watching me, studying me, cataloging my fear like it was something beautiful to him. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall, shatter it into 100 pieces, but fear chained me still. The very idea of cutting off contact made me imagine worse things, like him showing up at my door uninvited. I began to research him in secret, each keystroke feeling like a trespass I couldn't take back. Daniel Gray. The name was too common, and the internet spat out dozens of meaningless results, faces that didn't belong to the man from the ditch. But eventually, I found something that made my heart stutter. A local news article, 2 years old. It described a family tragedy, a fire in a countryside home. A man named Daniel Gray survived, but his parents hadn't. There was no mention of a sister, no Emma in the obituary, no second victim listed among the dead. My stomach twisted with unease. If Emma wasn't in the article, who was she? A lie? A phantom? Or someone Daniel was keeping hidden for reasons I couldn't yet understand? The discovery haunted me, but it also gave me clarity. Daniel wasn't what he claimed. He had pulled me into a story stitched together with half-truths and shadows, and I was too entangled now to walk away. That night, I sat with Clara's old notebook in my lap, a gift from the neighbor who used to watch me as a child, the only person who ever told me to write things down when I was afraid. I scribbled every detail I could remember from that night, from the angle of the wrecked car, to the way Daniel's voice trembled when he first spoke. The act of writing calmed me slightly, gave me the illusion of control, but when I closed the notebook, I felt his shadow pressing in again. He was still out there, and somehow, I was still inside his game. Days blurred into nights, my paranoia growing sharper, my sleep broken by sounds I couldn't explain. Once, I thought I saw someone standing across the street, half hidden behind a tree. When I stepped closer to the window, the figure was gone, but the dread it left behind clung to me like damp clothes. Another night, I woke to the faint sound of footsteps outside my house, soft but deliberate. By the time I dared to peek through the blinds, silence had reclaimed the street. My chest burned from holding my breath too long, but I couldn't shake the certainty. He was testing me, reminding me that his presence was constant, and in some twisted way, it worked. I stopped doubting his reach. One evening, after nearly collapsing from exhaustion, I found the courage to call the hospital where Emma had supposedly been admitted. My voice trembled as I asked about her, but the nurse on the line paused too long before answering. "I'm sorry, but we don't have any patient by that name." The words landed like a knife in my chest, cutting through every fragile piece of trust I had left. Emma wasn't real, or worse, she had been real once, but Daniel was keeping her hidden, her story rewritten into something only he could control. Rage and terror swirled inside me, colliding until I could hardly breathe. I wasn't just dealing with a grieving brother. I was entangled with a man who built prisons out of lies. The next message came at midnight, as though he knew I'd uncovered the truth. "Don't listen to strangers. Only I know what's real. Only I can protect you." The audacity of his words snapped something inside me. Protect me? From what? From him? From the silence of my family who abandoned me even when I begged for help? The anger was sharp and cleansing, and for the first time it overpowered the fear. I typed a reply with trembling fingers. "Leave me alone, Daniel. I'm not part of your story." My thumb hovered before I hit send, but something in me needed to assert it, needed to prove I wasn't his puppet. Seconds later, his reply flashed. "You don't get to decide that." Sleep was impossible after that. I paced the floor, every creak of the wooden boards beneath my feet making me feel like I was being hunted inside my own home. At one point, I thought I heard a whisper near the back door, so faint I couldn't tell if it was real or just the hallucination of exhaustion. My chest constricted, but I refused to check. If he was there, I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. Instead, I sat by the window until the first light of dawn broke, my eyes raw and burning. The sunlight didn't soothe me, though. It only revealed how fragile I had become, how much of my life was now dictated by Daniel's unseen hand. But underneath the fear, something new began to grow. A determination, fragile but steady, like the first flame of a candle. If Daniel wanted me tangled in his story, then I would turn the script on him. I would learn who he really was, where he came from, and why he had chosen me. For too long, I had lived in silence, abandoned by the very people who should have loved me most. I had survived cruelty before, survived being invisible in my own family, and I would survive this. Maybe Daniel believed he was the hunter, but I was done being prey. I whispered it aloud, my voice shaky but certain. "I'll find out who you really are." As if answering my vow, my phone buzzed one last time that morning. The message was longer than usual, written almost tenderly. "You've already started down the path. Don't fight it, Grace. By the time you reach the end, you'll thank me for choosing you." My fingers clenched so tightly around the phone that my knuckles turned white. Thank him? For dragging me into this darkness? For twisting my nights into nightmares? No. Whatever path he had planned, I would veer from it, carve my own, even if it led straight through the heart of his lies. But one thought lingered like a poison. If Emma was just a story, then what else had he fabricated? And what horrifying truth was he still hiding? The morning after Daniel's cryptic message, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, thick and suffocating, but it had begun to harden into resolve. I was done living in reaction to him, done pacing the floorboards like a prisoner in my own home. If he thought I was walking a path he had designed, then I would lay my own traps along the way. My heart pounded as I sketched a plan in Clara's notebook, each line of ink a lifeline pulling me away from helplessness. I wouldn't wait for Daniel to make his move. I would provoke him, corner him, force him to show me who he really was. It was reckless, maybe suicidal, but so was waiting. The first step was bait. He had chosen me because he believed I was vulnerable, cut off from my family and my past. easy prey for someone who thrived on fear. So I decided to lean into that illusion, to show him what he wanted to see, while quietly flipping the board beneath him. I began by sending him a message. Maybe you're right. Maybe no one else really understands me. The words tasted like poison, but I hit send anyway, my chest tightening with both disgust and anticipation. He replied almost instantly, as if he'd been waiting by his phone. Finally, you're beginning to see. I forced myself not to tremble, not to throw the device across the room. Instead, I whispered aloud, Step 1 complete. Next, I needed a witness, someone who could help me if things spiraled out of control. I thought of calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That a man was sending me unsettling texts? That he claimed to have seen me on the road? They would shrug it off as paranoia. So instead, I turned to Clara's old friend, Mrs. Alden, the woman who still lived 3 doors down. She was kind, sharp-eyed, and had never once questioned my worth, unlike my own blood. I visited her under the pretense of delivering groceries, then lowered my voice and said, If you see someone near my house late at night, call me, please. Her face tightened with worry, but she nodded firmly. I felt a sliver of comfort, though I didn't dare tell her the whole truth. That evening, I escalated the game. I sent Daniel another message, one meant to draw him closer. If you want me to understand you, maybe we should meet again. Just you and me, no shadows. My hands shook violently as I typed it, because I knew what I was inviting, but also because I needed to take back the reins. The reply came after a long pause, a silence that stretched and pulsed with menace. Finally, his words appeared. Good. Tomorrow night, the place you first saw me. My blood froze. The ditch. The road where it all began. My instinct screamed to run, but I forced myself to breathe. This was the trap, and I would step into it willingly. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every possible scenario in my head. Would he try to scare me? To break me further? Or would he show me something worse? Something I couldn't yet name? Every creak in the house sounded like a footstep, every rustle of the wind like a whisper through the walls. At one point, I thought of my mother's dismissive text, deal with it alone. The bitter irony stung me, but it also fueled my resolve. If my family had cast me aside, then I had nothing left to lose in confronting the man who had chosen me as his obsession. Fear had built my life's walls for too long. Tomorrow, I would tear them down. By morning, I forced myself into a calm I didn't feel. I prepared carefully, sliding Clara's notebook into my bag, along with a small kitchen knife I barely knew how to hold. I wasn't naive enough to think I could overpower him, but the weight of it steadied me, a reminder that I wasn't entirely defenseless. I also downloaded a recording app on my phone, determined to capture every word Daniel said, every slip of truth that might unravel his lies. The mirror reflected my pale, sleepless face, but behind the hollow eyes, I saw something I hadn't before: defiance. It was enough to carry me into the night. When darkness fell, the world outside seemed sharper, each shadow a warning, each gust of wind a question. My steps toward the road felt heavy, yet strangely deliberate, like I was walking toward the climax of a story I hadn't chosen, but was determined to finish. The ditch appeared ahead, black and gaping, its memory wrapping around me like a cold shroud. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I pressed forward, phone ready, knife hidden beneath my sleeve. For a moment, silence ruled, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my boots. Then, from the darkness, his voice emerged. I knew you'd come. Daniel stepped into view, his figure illuminated faintly by the moon. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes glowed with something far worse: certainty, possession. You're finally where you're supposed to be, he said softly, as if we were co-conspirators rather than predator and prey. I raised my phone subtly, thumb brushing against the record button, heart hammering in my chest. Then tell me the truth, I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. Who is Emma, and why me? His lips curved slightly, and for the first time, I thought I saw hesitation flicker in his gaze. He exhaled slowly, and his words slithered out. Emma isn't who you think she is. She's closer to you than you realize. The revelation hit like an electric shock, my breath catching in my throat. What did he mean? Closer to me. I stumbled back, knife pressing against my palm, recording app still running. He took a step forward, deliberate and patient, like a teacher indulging a slow student. You were always part of this, Grace, he whispered. You just never knew. The air around me seemed to collapse. my body caught between bolting into the night or standing my ground to hear the rest of his poisonous truth. My trap had been set, but what I hadn't expected was that Daniel had one waiting for me too. And as the silence stretched between us, I realized with a shudder I might already be inside it. The air was heavy with Daniel's words, pressing down on me until I thought my chest would cave in. "Emma is closer to you than you realize." The phrase kept spinning in my mind, sharp and relentless, as if he had planted a ticking bomb inside me. My grip on the knife tightened, though I knew I wouldn't be able to stop him if he lunged. Still, I wanted him to see I wasn't entirely defenseless, that I was willing to fight. His eyes caught the faint glint of metal under the moonlight, and for the first time, his smirk faltered. "You think that will save you?" he whispered. My voice cracked but held steady enough. "It might, but the truth will save me more." Daniel tilted his head, his expression unreadable, his silhouette casting a distorted shadow that seemed larger than life. "You've been lied to your whole life, Grace. Not just by me, but by the people you call family," he said, his tone dripping with venom. My heart thudded painfully at the word family. "They discarded you, mocked you, left you out on that road, didn't they? And yet, you still cling to them." The reminder of my mother's cruel text and my brother's mocking emoji stung afresh. But I forced myself to breathe through the pain. "You're not going to twist this," I snapped. "They may have abandoned me, but that doesn't mean you own me." His smile returned, slow and sinister. "Don't I?" I felt my anger flare, hot and blinding, cutting through the fear like a blade. "No," I spat, my voice shaking the silence around us. "You think breaking someone makes you powerful? You think reminding me of my family's cruelty gives you control? You're wrong. All it does is show how small you are." For a heartbeat, he didn't move, his face tightening, the smirk curdling into something darker. "Careful," he hissed, his tone losing its practiced calm. "You're testing the edges of my patience." But I wasn't backing down anymore. "Then let it snap," I said, breath trembling, "because I'm done being your victim." Daniel took a step closer, the gravel crunching beneath his boots like the snap of bones. I wanted to back away, but I forced myself to hold my ground, even as my stomach churned and my body screamed to run. "Emma," he said softly, almost reverently, "wasn't supposed to die. She was supposed to become you." The words punched through me, leaving me breathless. "What do you mean?" I demanded, though part of me was terrified of the answer. His eyes gleamed. "She was my beginning. You are my continuation. When your family failed you, it was fate aligning the pieces." A chill clawed its way down my spine, because for the first time, I realized he didn't just want to control me, he wanted to replace me. The ground tilted beneath me, reality shifting into something jagged and unfamiliar. My recording app was still running, capturing every word, every confession. I clung to that thought like a lifeline, even as my mind reeled. "You're sick," I whispered. "You think fate is an excuse for cruelty, for obsession? Emma wasn't yours to keep, and neither am I." His jaw tightened, his smile collapsing into a grimace. "You talk as if you have a choice, but you don't, Grace. You've already walked into my world, and there's no walking back." The night seemed to close around us, the ditch looming like a grave. My fear spiked, but so did my fury. "You're wrong again," I said, "because I still have something you'll never have. Freedom." That word seemed to strike him harder than the knife ever could. His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his armor, a flash of something raw and unguarded, fear. He lunged forward suddenly, his hand shooting out to grab my wrist. The knife clattered to the ground, but my phone stayed in my other hand, recording every frantic second. I twisted, yanking against his iron grip, adrenaline surging through me. "You can't leave," he snarled, his face inches from mine, spit flying with every word. "I won't let you leave." Panic clawed at my chest, but beneath it was a rising fire, a scream building in my throat, and I let it out, raw and piercing, shattering the silence of the road. My scream wasn't just fear, it was defiance, a battle cry ripped from years of abandonment and pain. Daniel flinched, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free and stumble back. My lungs burned, my throat scraped raw, but I screamed again, louder, hoping someone, anyone would hear. The night seemed endless, but somewhere in the distance, I thought I caught the faint echo of movement, tires on gravel, a car approaching. Daniel's eyes darted toward the sound, his certainty faltering. For the first time, he looked unsettled, like the predator realizing the trap had snapped around him. I straightened, my body trembling but my voice steady. "It's over, Daniel. You don't own me." He bared his teeth in something between a snarl and a laugh, shaking his head slowly. "You think one scream changes anything?" he muttered. "You don't understand. Emma's story didn't end the way it should have. Yours won't either." His words slithered into my ears, but I refused to let them burrow deeper. "No," I said firmly. "My story is mine. Not yours. Not hers. Mine." The headlights grew brighter in the distance, and Daniel's composure cracked further. He backed toward the shadows, his gaze locked on me, burning with fury and promise. "This isn't the end, Grace," he said, voice low and venomous. "It's only the beginning." Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he melted back into the darkness, leaving me shaking and gasping by the ditch. The sound of the approaching car filled the void he left behind, and my knees nearly buckled with relief. I scrambled to grab my phone, the recording still running, Daniel's twisted words etched forever into its memory. My heart hammered with both victory and terror, because I had proof now, but I also knew his warning wasn't empty. The night hadn't swallowed him whole. It had only let him slip away. As the headlights flooded the road, I realized something chilling. Daniel wasn't gone. He was waiting, somewhere just beyond the edges of light, for his next move. The car screeched to a stop beside me, and for a second, I couldn't breathe, fearing Daniel had circled back. But it wasn't him. It was an older man in a pickup, his lined face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. My lips trembled as I nodded, clutching my phone to my chest like a shield. I wanted to tell him everything, but the words tangled in my throat. Someone was here," I finally managed to whisper. His eyes scanned the darkness beyond the ditch. "Then let's get you somewhere safe." As I climbed into the truck, the glow of the headlights washing over the empty road, I felt a chill deep in my bones. Daniel had vanished, but his presence still lingered like smoke after fire. The man, who introduced himself as Frank, offered to take me to the nearest gas station. I sat stiffly in the passenger seat, the hum of the engine doing nothing to calm my nerves. My phone buzzed with a new message from the family group, and my stomach dropped. For a second, I almost didn't want to look, terrified of seeing more cruelty. But when I did, my blood froze. It was from my uncle, someone who rarely spoke in the chat. "Grace, don't believe anything he tells you. Leave Emma out of this." My hands shook as I reread the words. How could he know about Emma? I hadn't told anyone. My pulse quickened with dread, because suddenly, Daniel's obsession didn't seem so separate from my family's silence. It felt tied together, like a knot I'd been too blind to see. At the gas station, Frank left me with a phone charger and a cup of water, assuring me the sheriff's department was nearby if I needed help. As soon as he drove away, I plugged in my phone, desperate to piece everything together. My recording of Daniel was intact, his voice chilling and undeniable. But it was my uncle's message that gnawed at me, burrowing deeper with every second. "Leave Emma out of this." The words rang with warning, with guilt, as if he had something to protect. I opened the group chat again, scrolling back through years of empty exchanges, cruel jokes, and dismissive comments. Emma's name had never appeared, not once. It was as if she didn't exist, erased from the narrative. My breath hitched. Maybe that was the point. Maybe my family hadn't just abandoned me, they had buried her. I searched Emma's name online, fingers trembling as I typed, though I didn't know what I expected to find. At first, nothing. No obituary, no school records, no trace of her. The emptiness was suffocating. But then I stumbled across a blurry article from 15 years ago, about a missing girl who vanished without explanation. The photo was grainy, but I knew instantly. The same eyes, the same shape of face. Emma. My heart thundered, and a sick realization spread through me. She hadn't been some stranger caught in Daniel's madness. She had been family. My family. The girl they never spoke of. The sister I never knew I had. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering against the table as a sob tore free. All those years of silence, all their cruelty, it hadn't been neglect alone. It had been a cover-up. The gas station's fluorescent lights flickered above me, buzzing like angry insects, and I felt the ground tilt beneath my feet. My mother's sharp disdain, my brother's mocking cruelty, my uncle's warning. They weren't just about me. They were the echoes of something far darker, something they'd buried under layers of indifference. Daniel's words returned, searing my thoughts. Emma is closer to you than you realize." He hadn't been lying. He had been hinting at the truth. She was my sister, the ghost my family refused to acknowledge. My chest tightened with rage and grief, colliding into something raw and unbearable. How could they let me believe I was simply unwanted, when all along I had been living in the shadow of a hidden tragedy? I replayed Daniel's recording, listening again to his confession, his obsession with Emma, his claim that she was supposed to become me. The meaning shifted now, sharper and more grotesque. He hadn't chosen me by chance. He had chosen me because of her, because of Emma's disappearance. I was the second act in a twisted performance he had never stopped staging. My skin crawled, bile rising in my throat. But even as terror clawed at me, a new determination burned through the fear. I couldn't let this stay hidden any longer. My family's lies, Daniel's obsession, Emma's silent story, it all had to come out. For the first time, I felt like my voice could matter, not just for me, but for her too. The phone buzzed again, another message flashing on the screen, this time from my mother. "Grace, don't go digging into the past. You'll only hurt yourself. Let it go." My fingers clenched so hard around the device I thought it would snap. Her words weren't cold dismissal this time. They were pleading, desperate, laced with fear. That fear told me everything I needed to know. She knew. She had always known. The rejection, the cruelty, the endless attempts to push me away. It wasn't just disdain for me. It was guilt, festering in every silence. My anger flared so hot it left me trembling. For years I had begged for scraps of love, while all along they were trying to keep me blind. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered Emma's name aloud for the first time, letting it linger in the stale air of the gas station. Emma. It felt fragile, sacred, like unlocking a door that had been sealed for half my life. I pictured her face from the article, wondered what her laugh sounded like, how her voice would have blended with mine if we had grown up together. And then, the gutting thought, had she cried for help the way I did tonight? Had she been met with silence? The same silence my family weaponized against me? The ache was unbearable, but behind it was resolve. I wouldn't let her be erased again. Even if it broke me, even if it destroyed what little remained of my family, I would bring her into the light. By the time I left the gas station, the night sky was thinning, hints of dawn brushing the horizon. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind burned with clarity. Daniel had given me the pieces, and my family had given me the rest. The puzzle was hideous, but it was complete enough to reveal the truth. Emma wasn't just a ghost haunting the shadows of my life. She was my blood, my sister, the reason for their cruelty and silence. And somewhere, buried beneath years of lies, was the answer to what had really happened to her. As the first rays of sunlight cut through the darkness, I made a silent vow. I would uncover Emma's fate, no matter what it cost. The first light of dawn spilled across the empty road as I drove away from the gas station, my heart pounding with a mix of terror and resolve. Every mile felt like a step away from the person I had been, the girl who had begged for love and received only neglect. Daniel's face haunted me, but so did my family's silence, each one a ghost that had shaped my life in ways I was only now beginning to understand. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened, vowing I wouldn't stop until Emma's story was heard, until the chains of secrecy and fear were shattered. My chest ached with exhaustion, but beneath it all, a fire burned, fierce and unyielding, promising justice and truth. I pulled into a small cafe on the outskirts of town, the hum of early morning traffic grounding me after the chaos of the night. I ordered coffee I barely tasted, my mind spinning with strategies, questions, and memories. How had they hidden her? How had my parents silenced her existence while punishing me for daring to live? The anger and grief threatened to consume me, but I held it at bay, channeling it into purpose. I pulled out my phone, drafted a message to the authorities, and contacted a private investigator I had researched days ago. Emma deserved to be found, and her story demanded exposure. I could no longer be passive. I could no longer allow silence to rule. Hours later, after contacting every lead and receiving confirmation that the investigation was underway, I felt a flicker of hope. There were moments when doubt clawed at me, whispering that maybe I was chasing a shadow, that Emma had been lost forever. But then I pictured her, alive or gone, deserving of someone who would fight for her, someone who refused to bow to fear. My phone buzzed with another message, this time from an unknown number. I know what happened to Emma. Meet me at the old cabin by Miller's Creek. Come alone. My pulse skyrocketed. It could be a trap, but it could also be the first real chance at uncovering the truth. Every instinct screamed danger, yet I knew I had no choice. I drove to the cabin with hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they trembled. The forest surrounding the road cast eerie shadows, each one a reminder of the nights I had spent alone, abandoned, and terrified. When I arrived, the cabin was silent, its wooden walls weathered and sagging. I stepped inside cautiously, my senses hyper-aware of every creak of the floorboards. In the dim light, a figure emerged from the shadows, face obscured by a hood. "Grace," a voice whispered, tremulous yet certain. "I'm the one who found her, who's been keeping her safe." My breath caught. Could it really be true? Could Emma really be alive, hidden by someone who knew the cruelty that ran through my family? The figure pulled back the hood to reveal a woman with eyes that mirrored my own. My throat tightened. "Emma," I breathed, unable to believe it. She nodded, tears streaming silently, and in that moment, 15 years of unanswered questions, pain, and betrayal collided with relief and awe. I reached for her, and she ran into my arms, our tears mingling as we clung to each other. Two halves of a story finally reunited. The years of absence, of suffering, of silence, could not be erased, but for the first time, there was a bridge between us, a lifeline. I whispered over and over, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry it took so long." Emma pulled back, gripping my hands and shaking her head. "It's not your fault, Grace. You survived. You never gave up." Her words were both balm and blade, comforting yet cutting through the anger I had carried for so long. We spent hours recounting the pieces of her story, the captivity, the threats, the careful concealment by those who wanted to maintain their image at all costs. Each revelation made my stomach twist with fury at my parents, at their cruelty, at the system that allowed them to hide the truth. But with every word Emma spoke, I felt my own strength grow. This was no longer just about survival. This was about reclaiming our lives. By afternoon, we returned to my car, Emma walking beside me like we had never been apart. I dialed my parents' numbers, my fingers trembling with both fear and defiance. When Margaret answered, her voice dripped with feigned concern. "Grace, are you okay? Where have you—" I cut her off. "You know where Emma is. You know what you did. You will face the consequences for hiding her, for abandoning both of us, for silencing the truth." Silence followed on the line, thick and suffocating. Margaret's arrogance faltered, and I realized, with a grim satisfaction, that the tables had turned. For the first time, they had no power over me, no authority, nothing. I had my sister, the truth, and my own voice. That was enough. Emma and I worked together to involve authorities, lawyers, and social services. The investigation revealed a pattern of deception and cruelty that stretched back decades, exposing my parents' manipulation, their concealment of Emma, and the psychological abuse they had inflicted on me. Each report, each statement, was a brick removed from the walls of fear they had built around us. My parents' calls went unanswered, their texts ignored. The anger that had simmered for years transformed into clarity. The world could see what they had done. Their reputation, their control, and their power over me were shattered. Emma and I were finally free. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, I sat on the hood of my car with Emma beside me. We laughed, we cried, and we shared the stories we had kept hidden for so long. The bond we had missed over 15 years was formed in hours of honesty, trust, and raw emotion. For the first time in my life, I felt a peace I had never known. Our family was no longer defined by the people who had abandoned us, but by the love we found in each other. The past had been cruel, but it could no longer dictate our future. And as we drove away from the road that had once been the stage for fear and isolation, I knew something profound. Survival was not enough. Thriving was possible. Love, truth, and courage could create a life far richer than any denial or cruelty. Emma held my hand, and I knew we were no longer lost, no longer shadows in a dark story. We were authors of our own narrative now, writing a chapter filled with light, strength, and unbreakable bonds. The road ahead was ours, and nothing could take it away.